typically adjudication, which is introduced under that Act. So I suppose most of us here will have obviously some sort of engagement in construction, and you'll probably be familiar with the fact that there's typically various ways, as I try to move the slide here, various ways in which construction disputes are typically resolved. Like, we go to negotiation, as I'm encouraged to shout it louder. So typically, we'll all be familiar with negotiation, without prejudice forum, where people just go in and talk and state what the problem is, and in a without prejudice forum try and resolve the dispute. Mediation, typically voluntary, but often it is and more court directed now. The rules of the Superior Court provide for it, so mediation is another form of dispute resolution. Conciliation, just moving along, a lot of us in construction will be familiar with conciliation as a means in which to resolve disputes, because typically an expert is brought in and you get that third party view. What other means we have up there? Arbitration. Arbitration, obviously we've had that as a statutory basis for dispute resolution. It's been around a long time. Less used in this jurisdiction, but still very common. Expert determination and early neutral evaluation. Just other pros. I suppose the point here is that there's an awful lot of forums for disputes within construction, and into this scene steps adjudication. Can everyone hear me? Because I feel like I'm roaring. Okay. So into this scene, as I say, steps adjudication. And adjudication has developed a lot in the past year. I mean, the Act has obviously been around for a couple of years. The bill was around for a few years before that. We've been talking for years saying, will it ever come in? It's probably too late if it comes in. Maybe years ago was when it should have been in, when subcontractors were really having issues. But in any event, there was a kind of a blitz of activity in the past few months, and resulting in April of this year, the Act has now been commenced, and it applies to contracts entered into after the 25th of July this year. So this is big news for any of us, I suppose, in the construction industry, because obviously adjudication, as we will discuss now, is a very, very significant introduction to the whole scene of construction. The Act deals with two aspects, really. There's two strands to it, dealing with payment provisions under the Act and then the introduction of adjudication. My focus here today is just to focus on adjudication, but I don't want to skip the fact that the Act has a whole other half in bringing in a statutory regime for payment provisions. So to set the scene into which adjudication is stepping in Ireland, adjudication has existed in the UK for years. The 1996 Act reference there is in the UK since 1998. So we have the benefit of a whole body of case law over in the UK, which is obviously been very, very, very beneficial to us and will be beneficial to us as our cases start to take hold. The Act itself, obviously the drafting was very helpful, because we, the Irish legislature, have had the benefit of seeing how those various clauses have played out in the UK. So, that's the point there, that adjudication has been in England for a long time, and we will get the benefit of that. But as I'm going to touch upon at the end of my lecture, although there is that whole body of case law that's of course of benefit to us, the big question is, how is it all going to play out in Ireland? And we're probably just a little, different as a jurisdiction. We're smaller. The question has been asked, are contractors here really going to bite off the hand that feeds them and enter into adjudication? So we also have a constitution here. They don't have that in the UK. is adjudication really going to take off in the same way as it has in the UK? So these are all questions that we'll see pretty quickly over the next year or two, but in any event, to be aware that the UK has a very significant body of case law and a very similar legislative setup. Differences between our legislation and the UK. So in the UK, the legislation refers to a dispute being referred to adjudication. In our legislation, it refers to a payment dispute. You know, I don't know again if this is actually going to make that big a difference. At the end of the day, a lot of disputes end up being about payment anyway. So again, just it's possibly something that large play will be made of in the early cases, but just to note it, that this is a difference to the UK. In the UK, they don't have a threshold. In Ireland, we do. There is a threshold of €10,000. So for contract sums that are less than €10,000, they are excluded. So that's the contract sum as opposed to the claim. You can have a smaller claim, it's just that the contract sum, that there's a 10,000 threshold. I've mentioned the fact that we're a smaller jurisdiction, so then therefore we are a little bit different to the UK, and the industry here tends to be a little bit tighter, so that may have a very significant impact on how things play out here. Also in the UK, this is no small issue, they have a dedicated technology and construction court, so they have a dedicated court for construction issues. We don't. Okay, our court lists have improved one hell of a lot in the past few years to where they were at, but we don't have a dedicated court, and it's not even clear what the procedure will be when decisions are brought to court here. So it's all very well to have introduced our legislation, and I'm not knocking that, it's a wonderful thing, but we really do need at least rules of the Superior Court brought in quite quickly, because there's no point having the legislation there and then the teeth not being there at the end of the day in the court system. I've mentioned the fact that there is no written constitution in the UK. There is here, and that leads to a whole sense of natural justice in this jurisdiction, which it doesn't exist in the UK, and I do touch upon that at the end of the lecture. So the purpose of this lecture and the thrust of it is to focus on section 6 on in the Act, which, as I say, is the adjudication, the actual dispute resolution section, and that is what the next 10 minutes will be about. But just before I do that, I should just bring us to that point. And so this is the kind of a whistle-stop tour of the early sections in the Act. So construction contracts are covered in the Act. They are defined in the Act, and it will take a lecture alone to go into that, so I decided instead to focus on the exclusions, what is excluded. So we mentioned contracts with a contract sum of less than 10,000 are excluded. Other exclusions are on your slides there. So a residential dwelling with a floor area of less than 200 square meters, or where the party to the contract resides in the dwelling. So they are excluded. So too, we have exclusions for PPP contracts. So contracts between a state authority and their partner in a PPP arrangement. So that actually is only referring, of course, though, to the top PPP contract. Typically in a PPP arrangement there will be a whole suite of contracts, subcontracts really down the line. They're not excluded. So presumably the reason for that exclusion was that the state authority, and these tend to be very significant contracts, don't need the protection of this Act. But so you'll see various exclusions there. As I say, the Act in its first part deals with payment. So what it sets out is that every construction contract shall provide for having an adequate mechanism for payment. So you need to have an adequate mechanism for determining what is due under the construction contract, to have an adequate mechanism for determining the date on which claims for payment can be made, and the date upon which those payments fall due. So essentially, if you think about any of the standard contracts within the industry as it is, these do typically provide for this. That's one of the main tenets of the Act, having a mechanism for payment. If there isn't a mechanism for payment, there's a schedule given in the Act, and this tends to go around 30-day cycles. So if there isn't a schedule, if there isn't a mechanism, an adequate mechanism for payment in the Act, in your contract, the Act provides a schedule which sets up 30-day cycles. Another aspect of the Act is that it excludes pay when paid clauses, which are essentially clauses that say that a provision in a construction contract is ineffective if it provides that payment of an amount due is subject and conditional on the making of a payment by another person. And we saw these for years in lots of construction subcontracts, and this is obviously just a paternalistic aspect of the Act, looking after subcontractors, saying no, these are ruled out, you can't have pay when paid clauses. So as my 5-minute line goes up, I get on to the main part of the Act, which is essentially I'm going to have to cut this short, but so Section 6 of the Act is the introduction of adjudication into Ireland. Some key aspects of that: it's a form of dispute resolution, just like conciliation, arbitration, etc. However, the difference is that this is a right to refer a dispute at any time, which essentially means we're used to seeing in contracts that before you go to arbitration you have to go to conciliation or potentially mediation. No, nothing like that. You can jump in, you can go at any time. So this leads to a real potential for ambush. I suppose in the UK what they call it is a system of rough justice. They say that the anxiety to get the right answer has been subsumed. I'm missing that quote. To get the right answer has been subsumed by by the desire to get a quick answer. So speed is overtaking, the detail, and this is a typical timescale. Under the Act, these timescales are set out. It says that after service of a notice of adjudication, the parties can agree an appointment within 5 days. If there is no agreement, then they refer to the panel. After the appointment, there's 7 days within which the party gives a notice to refer the dispute to the adjudicator, and then the adjudicator has 28 days to come to a decision. Now, within that 28 days, typically he'll give the other side an opportunity to reply, etc. But under any view of this, you can see that this is an outrageously tight timeline. Of course, there is scope for extension, but very limited. There's a 28-day extension if all the parties agree, or up to 14 days if the referring party consents. So I suppose one of the large points to take out of this timetable is that the referring party may have been sitting on this claim and getting it together for a long, long time, and an employer under a contract can be absolutely ambushed with a claim, and that is what has happened in the UK, that the subcontractor submits a claim and they have it well prepared, and then just a matter of days the employer or the contractor in the subcontract situation is forced to deal with the claim. So just tight timelines, and I suppose the message we all need to take away is this is happening. This is happening from the 25th of July, so it's very, very important. So this is obviously me under a ton of paper. There's lots more we could talk about in the Act. I'm just highly conscious that time is running out, and I don't want to sort of blitz too many things. So I suppose if we're left, the main things I impress upon you are the tightness of the timetable, the fact that this is, as we say, a system of rough justice. In the UK, what we have seen is that the courts have said, well, they're not going to overturn decisions of adjudicators. The TCC in the UK has a great respect for adjudicators, and because it says that essentially Parliament came up with this legislation. Parliament must have known that the decision was going to be qualified in terms of time, and so therefore, it is a very, very active system in the UK. It has overtaken conciliation and arbitration to a large extent, and for that reason, if we tend to follow the UK, we need to sit up and take notice. I don't think I'm going to have time here to go into enforcement, but what I will touch upon is what I touched upon at the beginning of the lecture, is the whole, just, are we going to be different in Ireland? And I suppose what this means is a consideration of natural justice. Like, there's these common law maxims such as audi alteram partem, the desire for, you know, the other side always to be held, to be heard. And I suppose these sort of principles have been subsumed these maxims of common law have been subsumed into Irish law through the Irish Supreme Court over many years. So we have old case law there setting out very firmly that where a piece of legislation does interfere with the rights of individuals, then it does have to accord with the principles of judicial justice, of constitutional justice. Constitutional justice is enshrined obviously in our constitution. So, you know, the point here is we have case law stating that because we have a constitution, acts here that interfere with the rights of parties may just have to be reviewed in another way. Typically that often means that, you know, parties are criticised if they don't have oral hearings, or the other side doesn't have a fair chance to be heard. And looking at the timetable that I presented to you earlier, you can see that these are risks, and so there's potential cases to be brought, and this may become an area in Ireland for us. So these are all fair process cases. So what are we going to do, I suppose, bearing all this in mind? Well, I suppose contractors practically have to consider the fact that this is a very tight process. They're going to have to be ready to explore all sorts of tactics and be alert to those tactics, gain time wherever they can in the timetable. But one has to be ready to react quickly, and therefore records are absolutely key. Systems in discovery, in law, we have for years had systems of keyword searching, and these sort of systems, you know, should be probably used by contractors now as this whole new world enters and comes along. I wrap up with some biblical quote to show that although we all think that adjudication is bad, it's probably not as bad as it was back in Babylonian times. And a word on, as I mentioned there, the future. Early cases will be telling we definitely need rules of the Superior Court. It's going to be a very interesting time. More than anything, it's going to be very exciting. From the 25th of July, I don't know if it's going to be a slow start, if it's going to be a fast start, but bring it on, and we look forward to seeing what happens. Whistle stop tour.